have been, and this is recording now, and we'll stop the recording when I stop talking. Decadal surveys have been used in the US in space sciences and planetary science to plan out what the community wants to do with NASA funding. Uh, and that was a pretty successful process, at least according to the people who reported it. And so for Earth sciences, this was pushed as a way to do strategic planning. Initially, uh, almost 20 years ago. So the 2007 report, Earth Science and Applications from Space, laid out a plan for the coming decade. It green-lighted the SWAT satellite, and it did a bunch of other things. And then 10 years later, the next decadal survey, which was called Thriving on Our Changing Planet, set out a plan for what should have happened over the last 10 years. And just to give you a sense of how that worked, this is from the report. And what it shows is, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
There were requests for input from the community at large, and that led to 290 things that came in. Those were sorted and prioritized, and so that became 103 science and applications objectives. And from that, some of them were identified as priority items. So most important objectives, and there were some targeted observables that became part of the recommended missions. There was also a careful documentation of what's considered the program of record, things that were happening otherwise, and that was viewed as something that, since it was going to happen, it didn't need to be recommended in the decadal survey. So the decadal survey then came up with this set of things to be looked at, the program of record, and then a series of missions, including expensive medium to large missions that were designated to happen. Earth System Explorers, a new program of missions that were targeted to cost $310 million and were to be competed among a set of priorities. And then some things for incubation, things where more study was clearly going to be needed, but there was priority in doing this, and planetary boundary layer fell into that. And then an Earth Ventures program, a lower cost program that allowed for slightly cheaper competed missions. So that's where we are now. In thinking, it's been almost 10 years, so it's time for the next decadal survey. And the Space Studies Board's Committee on Earth Science and Applications from Space has put out this request for response to a survey. So the survey was in the email messages that went out, and this is a chance for community input on what might happen in the next decadal survey. The survey has 12 questions. 5 of them are general questions. They ask about lessons learned from past decadal surveys, success-oriented implementation, which is really saying, wow, we didn't get much done in the last decade. And so how do we recommend things that can actually happen? That's my reading of the question. Today's context, what's going on right now, and then room for discussion of specific topics and other. And then there are 7 specific questions asking about the prioritization approach. Should they use something like the plan from 2007, which recommended specific missions, or the plan from 2017, which recommended variables or observables or something else? The role of science versus applications, how do you set a balance between them? That's something that space sciences or planetary sciences doesn't have to do so much. Decision rules, what guidance should NASA be given if it's not actually possible to complete what was recommended? The organizational structure, the last decadal survey used 5 thematic panels with a few cross-cutting areas. They were not exactly disciplinary. Is that the right approach? Costing constraints. Should this plan for budget growth? Should they assume a capped budget? What's community input? What's the right strategy for requesting input from the community? And how to deal with the program of record? How should they incorporate consideration of what NASA, NOAA, USGS, and other agencies plan to do? So I don't know if anybody else who's been involved in this wants to comment, Mark or Carol Ann or anybody else. At any rate, I went through these goals and thought the things where maybe the community can most easily comment are organizational structure, the avenues for community input, and the program of record. And that was just my reading of where I thought there was perhaps a lot of room for people to say what they thought. Um, and so on organizational structure, I thought I'd comment a little on how that's happened. In 2007, there were 7 thematic panels. And you can see what they are here, or societal benefits, land use, ecosystem dynamics, weather, climate variability, water resources, human health and security, and solid earth hazards. If you're an oceanographer, you'll notice that there's no ocean in there. And that led to some consternation and side memos and a lot of frustration in the oceanographic community at the time. 10 years later, the panels are laid out here. They were um, global hydrological cycle, weather and air quality, marine and terrestrial ecosystems, climate variability and change, and Earth surface and interior. And once again, the ocean was either nowhere or everywhere. And I think I was on the steering committee for this. The argument was very much that the ocean transcended all these boundaries, and this was intended to create a structure that would let people look at um, interdisciplinary science or science that transcended the existing stovepiping that we might have between fields. So was that a success? That's something that is maybe up for debate. We can talk about that. Um, so this is the organizational structure question in detail, and we can come back to that in discussion. And then community input is here, and this is really a debate about whether community provides information on applications priorities um, or possible missions. What's the best way to gather information? Ask, has the process that's been used in the past been satisfactory, and how could it be done better? And then the program of record is another thing that gets a lot of attention. This question asks about NASA, NOAA, and USGS planned and budgeted missions. It says, so it notes in the past decadal survey, things that were in the program of record were not recommended. They were assumed that they were going to happen. And it asks, do you recommend a similar approach for the third decadal start? Is your answer dependent on assumptions about the available budgets for new missions? And I think what this question doesn't ask, but we might ask in the context of an OASIS webinar that's pretty international, is where does the international dimension fit into the program of record? So I think we might stop recording here and start discussion. And